Hello and welcome to Indus News with me, Osman Lone. Well, we begin this hour with our top story, and that's in Kashmir, where Indian troops have martyred 2 Kashmiri youths in occupied Kashmir. Occupation forces have killed 16 youths in the occupied valley over the last 30 days now. Locals say the civilians were martyred during a cordon and search operation in the Pulwama district. Indian forces also arrested 6 Kashmiri youths, including freedom activist Bashir Ahmed Qureshi. Kashmir has been under a lockdown and communications blackout since the 5th of August. While staying in occupied Kashmir, detained politicians have rejected the Indian government's offer to sign a bond for their release. The bond bars the politicians from speaking against India's illegal annexation of the valley. Those who violate the bond after signing it will have to pay a hefty fine. Indian media reports that Kashmiri politicians Shah Faisal, Ali Muhammad Sagar and Naeem Akhtar have repeatedly refused to sign the bonds. They said these bonds will further curtail political space in the valley and discredit local leaders in the eyes of Kashmiris. The Kashmiri leadership, including pro-Indian politicians, have been detained indefinitely by occupation forces since the 5th of August. Islamabad has challenged New Delhi's credentials for membership of the UN Security Council. Pakistan's envoy Munir Akram raised the objection while addressing the UN General Assembly. Akram said India is in blatant violation of the UNSC's resolution on the Kashmir dispute. He said India has imposed a complete lockdown on 8 million people in the occupied valley for more than 100 days now. Akram said New Delhi is committing human rights violations against Kashmiris as well as its own minorities. Indian female activist Bindu Amini has been attacked on the way to the Sabmarala temple in the southern state of Kerala. Hindu fundamentalists banned women of menstruating age from visiting the temple in defiance of a Supreme Court ruling last year. Local media reported that a man attacked Amini with pepper spray outside the Kochi Police Commissioner's office. Amini is one of the 2 women who first entered the Sabrimala temple in January this year. Officials also stopped Trupti Desai, another female activist, from entering the temple 10 days ago. Desai says she'll make another attempt to gain access to Sabmarala today. Kerala's state government has refused to provide security to women who want to visit the temple. The temple Sabmarala is a Hindu temple and the site of one of the largest annual pilgrimages in the world. In Pakistan, the Senate has rejected the United States statement that the China-Pakistan economic corridor would be added to the country's debt. Adopting a unanimous resolution against the statement, the Senate's Foreign Affairs Committee asked the US to stop interfering in the country's internal matters. It said the statement shows Washington's bias against the CPAC project. Well, staying with this story, US Ambassador to Islamabad, Paul Jones, says Pakistan has a sovereign right to determine its own future with regard to the China-Pakistan economic corridor. Last week, US Assistant Secretary of State Alice Wells called CPEC a debt trap for Pakistan. Speaking in Lahore, Jones said the US doesn't expect everyone to agree with her speech, as it was meant to start a debate on CPEC. The ambassador said all development projects should be transparent and discussed openly. Earlier, Pakistan and China strongly criticized Alice Wells' remarks, saying CPEC is a win-win for both countries. Pakistan has launched a key initiative to alleviate poverty from the country. Addressing the launching ceremony of the ISAS program in Islamabad, the Netherlands' Queen Maxima says increased connectivity across the country will help people get out of poverty. She said informal workers must have a bigger role in the economy. Queen Maxima is on a 3-day visit to Pakistan as the United Nations advocate for finance and development. In his address, Prime Minister Imran Khan said the country is getting out of its economic crisis. Khan said his government's policies are aimed at helping the poor. He thanked Queen Maxima for his visit to Pakistan. Now, 13 French soldiers have been killed in a helicopter collision during a counter-terrorist operation in Mali. In a statement, the French presidency said the accident occurred while the anti-terrorist Bahani force was engaging militants. The presidency said the militants have carried out a series of deadly strikes in northern Mali in recent weeks. This is the biggest loss of French troops in combat in the region since the intervention 6 years ago. France has over 4,500 troops countering insurgencies in Mali's Sahel region. Well, Turkey has given the US until April to resolve the dispute over its purchase of the Russian S-400 defense system. Earlier today, Washington said Turkey has crossed another red line by testing of the Russian radar system. Talking to the media in Ankara, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said foreign and defense ministers of Turkey and the United States should find a solution to end the dispute. Meanwhile, Moscow has shared plans to sign a new contract with Ankara to supply the S-400 missile system in the first half of 2020. Earlier, US Senator Christopher Holland said existing law requires President Donald Trump to impose sanctions on Ankara. US relations with Turkey became tense when Ankara decided to purchase the Russian S-400 missile system in December 2017. Seven militants of the Kurdistan Workers' Party have been killed in a Turkish airstrike in northern Iraq. In a statement, Turkey's National Defense Ministry said the operation is part of its counter-terrorism strategy. The ministry said Turkey will continue to destroy terrorist weapon caches and shelters. It said over 400 Kurdish militants have been killed in northern Iraq over the past 4 months. Turkey holds the PKK responsible for the deaths of over 40,000 people in a 30-year terror campaign against Turkey. The US says Myanmar is in breach of a global convention banning chemical weapons. US Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Thomas DiNanno said Myanmar has stockpiled chemical arms at a facility built in the 1980s. DiNanno was speaking at the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. He said the US is deeply concerned over Myanmar's chemical weapons stockpile. In 2015, Myanmar officially joined the Chemical Weapons Convention, which bans the production, storage and use of chemical arms. China has summoned US Ambassador Terry Branstad to demand that Washington block legislation backing Hong Kong's pro-democracy protests. China's foreign ministry says the US will have to bear the consequences if it doesn't stop interfering in Hong Kong. The ministry said a Senate bill passed last week interferes in China's internal affairs and supports violent criminal behavior by anti-China forces in Hong Kong. The bill, which is yet to be signed into law by President Donald Trump, threatens to revoke the territory's special economic status. Meanwhile, Hong Kong's leader Carrie Lam says her government will not compromise with the city's protest movement.
After these 5 or 6 months, Hong Kong people have realized very clearly that Hong Kong could no longer tolerate this chaotic situation. Everybody wants to go back to their normal life, and this requires the concerted efforts of every one of us. So, as I have said repeatedly, resorting to violence will not give us that way forward.
The US has asked the head of the Libyan National Army, Khalifa Haftar, to end his offensive on Tripoli. The State Department says steps to suspend hostilities and find a political resolution to the conflict were discussed when US officials met with Haftar. Both sides talked about a proposed ceasefire to the conflict, which has claimed over 1,000 lives now. The delegation included White House Deputy National Security Advisor Victoria Coates and US Ambassador to Libya Richard Norland. They said Washington fully supports Libya's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Washington did not reveal the location of the meeting. Well, we'll be back with more news from around the world right after this short break. Hello again, it's good to have you back. Now, talks on Syria's political future have collapsed after government representatives have walked out. Syrian state media reports the government pulled out of the second meeting of the Constitutional Committee in Geneva due to a dispute over its proposed agenda. Opposition members of the Constitutional Committee have accused Damascus of using stalling tactics. The talks are meant to be a step forward in what the UN says will be a long road to political rapprochement. The Constitutional Committee is made up of 15 members from the government, opposition and civil society. Clashes have broken out in Beirut between supporters of Lebanon's caretaker Prime Minister Saad Hariri and the Shia group Hezbollah. The clashes mark the second consecutive night of violence arising from Lebanon's political crisis. Demonstrations demanding a complete government overhaul began on the 17th of October, but the country's divided political class has yet to find a way forward. The UN Special Coordinator for Lebanon, Jan Kubish, has warned against civil strife in the country. Kubish has called upon the political parties to urge their supporters not to carry out acts of violence. In Albania, a 6.4 magnitude earthquake has rocked the capital of Tirana, killing at least 13 people and injuring 600 others. The US Geological Survey says the earthquake is the strongest hit the country in decades. The Albanian Defense Ministry says one person died after panicking and jumping out of a building during the quake in the capital. The ministry added the bodies of 3 other victims were pulled from the wreckage of 2 collapsed buildings in Durrës. A ministry spokeswoman said 2 women were found in the rubble of an apartment building in the northern village of Thumain. The Defense Ministry said firefighters and army staff are helping residents trapped under the rubble. Now to Spain, where Catalan separatists have voted overwhelmingly to support a socialist-led government in return for talks on independence. But ERC official Marta Vilalta said the party won't help Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez form a government unless he accepts its demands. Sánchez is desperate for support following the November 10th election, in which his Socialist Party fell short of a majority. The coalition is a fragile affair, as the Socialists oppose both independence and a referendum on succession. The ERC is pressing for continued talks between the Spanish and Catalan governments without any preconditions. The nationalists abstained from a parliamentary vote in July when Sánchez failed to get enough support for a new term. Ukraine says it will cut off gas from a Russian pipeline and begin storing it if Moscow does not renew a transit agreement. State gas company Naftogaz says it will start pumping the gas into underground storage facilities from the 1st of January. Naftogaz chief executive Yuri Vitrenko says a Russian gas transiting Ukraine without a corresponding contract will be considered contraband. The existing contract between Russia and Ukraine will expire on the December 31st. By then, Russia plans to commission the Nord Stream 2 and Turk Stream gas pipelines bypassing Ukrainian territory. Russia says it's ready to conclude a gas transit contract with Ukraine under European Union rules. But talks are complicated by legal wrangling between Russia's Gazprom and Ukraine's Naftogaz. The death toll from a measles epidemic in Samoa has surged to 32. Official data shows infection rates continue to soar out of control in the Pacific island nation. The government has declared a state of emergency to contain the outbreak, launching a compulsory vaccination program. The government says it has identified almost 2,500 cases of measles last week. It said 28 among the dead were children below the age of 4. A total of 57,000 people in the nation of 200,000 have been vaccinated in recent weeks. Meanwhile, UNICEF is distributing over 100,000 doses of the measles vaccine to Samoa to boost immunization efforts. A US think tank has warned of a creeping silent crisis menacing the world's food supply. The World Resources Institute says water shortages could jeopardize up to 40% of all irrigated crops by the year 2040. Scientists say water supplies are threatened by climate change and mismanagement, but farming is one of the largest factors. The think tank launched an online tool called Aqueduct Food, which maps water risks for more than 40 crops. Nearly 67% of wheat, 64% of maize and 19% of rice could be in areas with extremely high water stress by the year 2040. The think tank says it wants to ring the alarm bells before it's too late. It called for urgent action to improve irrigation and soil, better crop choices and less food loss and waste. Now, in business news, top US and Chinese negotiators have held another round of talks by telephone on an initial deal to end their trade war. In a statement, China's Ministry of Commerce said the two sides reached a consensus on properly resolving outstanding issues. It said Chinese Vice Premier Liu He spoke with US Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin. Earlier, US National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien said an initial trade agreement with China is still possible by the end of the year. Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba's shares have soared almost 8% after raising nearly $11 billion in its Hong Kong offering. Alibaba had set the initial share offer price at 176 Hong Kong dollars. It's now jumped over 7.5% to nearly 190 Hong Kong dollars. China's onshore money managers are the biggest new investors in Alibaba's Hong Kong's offering stock. Alibaba's chief financial officer, Maggie Wu, said about 1/3 of the tranche allocated to international buyers was taken up by first-time Chinese investors. She said the rest was absorbed by investors in the Asia-Pacific region and global funds. Well, the value of the world's most popular cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, has fallen by 35% on fears of Chinese restrictions. Bitcoin is now trading at its lowest level since May. Industry site CoinDesk says the cryptocurrency has slid from over $10,000 last month to a little over $6,500 now. Bitcoin's rise in October came after Chinese President Xi Jinping praised blockchain in a speech and called for improvements in its development. But Beijing has cracked down on businesses involved in cryptocurrency operations. China's central bank has pledged to continue to target exchanges and asked investors to be wary of digital currencies. Bitcoin touched its all-time high of nearly $20,000 2 years ago. The International Monetary Fund has approved a 2-year lending arrangement for Mexico worth $61 billion. In a statement, the IMF's Deputy Managing Director David Lipton said the program will replace an existing credit line of $74 billion. Lipton said the Mexican government intends to treat the new arrangement as precautionary and may request further reductions as risks recede. He said the new arrangement would bolster market confidence in Mexico at a time of trade uncertainty. Lipton added a sharp pullback of capital from emerging markets and increased risk premiums pose external risks to the Mexican economy. Mexico originally signed for an $86 billion IMF program in 2017 before it was scaled back to $74 billion in 2018. Mexico is the second largest economy in Latin America. Well, it's 19 degrees here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that's all from me and the team here in Lahore, but don't forget, for the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News. Thank you for watching and bye-bye.